I want to go to Peter Baker, and we are hearing a little bit from Trump now, just moments before he returned to the courtroom, before the break was over at 1:56 this afternoon. He writes on Truth Social, quote, "The prosecution, which has no case, has gone too far. Mistrial." What's your reaction, Peter, to this comment and overall how Donald Trump has been characterized this morning? It sounds like he has certainly held his tongue in court. He's at times had his eyes closed. At times he's been talking quietly, it sounds like, with his lawyers, certainly engaged in the testimony.
Yeah, look, that social media message, who is the audience for that? Of course, that's not the judge. He's not making a legal argument there. He's making an argument to the public, to the voting public, to his supporters. And what he's trying to say to them is focus on the injustice to me, not on the tawdry details of what I did or may have done or was alleged to have done, right? In other words, this is the day that, if you step back for a minute, we have been kind of waiting for in some ways for 7 or 8 years, in which you see these two characters, these two players in this drama, Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels, confronting each other in a court of law. And she there in that court of law, at a moment when he faces the penalty of possibly being incarcerated, is telling her story and telling, a story that's not very obviously flattering to him. And he wants, of course, as a candidate for president, not just a former candidate, not just a former president, he wants to distract from those details, which are not flattering to him, to focus on what he says are the injustices of the court proceeding. And that's why you see that social media message.
And Todd Blanche is arguing inside the courtroom, as we go back into the document again, that there's absolutely no reason for a mistrial. But the exact quote is, "I don't think there's any basis for a mistrial." But before that, the ADA, the Assistant District Attorney, said they have drafted a limiting instruction that Juan Merchan can give to prevent prejudice, but a mistrial is not warranted. Explain what that is.
Basically, they're concerned about protecting their record. Both sides are. The defense is moving for a mistrial. They're saying if there's a conviction, that might be a basis for an appeal. The prosecution is trying to protect their record also. And so they want, the jury's heard it all. So a limiting instruction really doesn't do that much. But in the legal fiction that a juror would reject something that the judge told them to reject, which is really the law of the case, the limiting instruction would be something that the jurors are only in their deliberations allowed to consider so much, disregard something else. It's like when a witness says something on the record and they say, strike that answer. The jurors have already heard it. So
the bell's been rung.
But they're not supposed to go back into the deliberation room and remember when that witness said something? No, that's not fair game. But no one's back there with them, so no one really knows what's going on. So
let me read, because Merchan is ruling on this now. He says, as a threshold matter, Mr. Blanche, I agree. There were things that should have been left unsaid. I think the witness was a little difficult to control, but, and here's the key line, I don't believe we're at the point where a mistrial is warranted. And then there's a motion to strike some of the testimony.
Yeah, and he says that motion is, in fact, granted. He says, I was surprised there weren't more objections. And then there's some laughter in the overflow room at this. We just discussed that, Shad. You said this was part of the defense strategy all along. Let them have a little bit of, leeway here so that you could raise this mistrial objection essentially after the break, right? So where does testimony go from here? What do you expect the judge to do? Will he create more limitations around Stormy Daniels' testimony moving forward? What do you think?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what the limiting instruction is going to be. It may be telling the jury to disregard certain aspects of the testimony. That threat part, I would think they would want to have the jury told, you shouldn't be taking that as some notion that Mr. Trump has anything to do with this. Something along those lines. Of course, the double edge of that is when you ask for a limiting instruction, it actually brings more attention to what the testimony was. And that's always a strategy question you have to decide on is, do I really want to flag this more by asking for a limiting instruction?
Well, and the judge is suggesting that the defense needs to take some responsibility here. He says, quote, when you say the bell has been rung, the defense has to take some responsibility for that. And he says the remedy is on cross-examination. Right. You both have experience as defense lawyers. Duncan, what does the defense do on cross now?
Look, we know what the defense is going to do in part because part of the the cross-examination here is political. They are going to go after Stormy Daniels as a liar, as an extortionist. They already did for her lawyer, Keith Davidson, earlier, and they are going to do the same thing to Stormy Daniels because they're trying to establish that she's a liar. That is really what they are. But the question is, does any of that get to the bottom line for what these charges are? And I think they're going to be having a very difficult time navigating her because she's going to be just as difficult a witness in answering their questions on cross-examination as she is answering Susan Hoffinger's questions on direct. She is going to be a feisty witness to cross-examine. So they're going to try to cabin her in as some liar, and I think she's going to be able to talk and give her side of the story as well and try to get that rapport with the jury and work on that. And we'll see where they go with it. But I think that's really what they're going to be trying to do.
I think even before today and what we read inside this document, if you saw any interviews ever with Stormy Daniels or you saw the documentary that's on Peacock right now, she is a feisty person and she talks about her life in a very forceful way. So assuming she's going to do the same on cross as she did on direct, Shan, does it benefit one side or the other that she has that personality and that force of personality?
It really benefits the prosecution. For the defense, she's a very treacherous witness to cross-examine. If they go at her too hard, the way that their client probably wants them to go at her, and attack her, you're a liar, just extortionist like your lawyer was, that's not going to play well with the jury. Even though they chose to have a female do the cross-examination, Stormy Daniels' documentary, other things, she comes across as feisty, but she's also sympathetic. And they have to be very careful not to look like they're assuming the personality of their client in doing that bullying. The smartest thing to do on cross-examination for her, which a lot of folks have said, is keep it very narrow. Just point out that she doesn't have any knowledge about the bookkeeping. She can't testify Trump directed this whole scheme, and then sit down. That would be the smartest thing to do.